All right. So welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for coming over. We know it's kind of towards the tail end of Climate Week. We're happy that you're not like out event yet. So thank you so much for everybody who could make it in person. And also, we really appreciate everybody who's joining us online. This is a project that we are launching as part of like New York City Climate Week. We're really excited to tell you all about it, and we have 4 amazing panelists that we're going to be presenting in just a few moments. But before that, we really want to thank the people that are making this possible, our funders, the Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research, as well as the Rockefeller Foundation. If we have people here, raise your hand. Thank you for the support on making this happen. We really appreciate it, as well as all our partners, steering committee, and working groups that have been working a lot in the past day and a half. Just a few housekeeping there's going to be room for Q&A after each panelist does a brief presentation. So for those in the floor, we have this great room. You can raise your hand, and whenever our moderator calls you, there's a mic right in front of you. You can click, we can test it now, click and check that there's a red light, and that is how you can say your comment and then turn that back off. And then for those who are joining us online, you can write your comments, questions in the chat, and we'll bring those to the moderator as well. So without further ado, I want to introduce you a great moderator that we have today. It's such a treat. Stenke Unema is a nutritionist and agricultural economist. She is the first executive secretary of UN Nutrition, which was established in 2020. And before that, she coordinated the UN System Standing Committee on Nutrition and worked on food and nutrition security policy and program development in various multilateral groups and international NGOs. Central to her work is coherent and consistent nutrition policy. And boy, we need that. She also works on advocacy and programming in the UN system, both global and country levels. So please help me welcome Stenke.
Thank you so much for these kind opening words. And, well, let's see if I'm a great moderator. Okay, so welcome to this afternoon. The objective of this afternoon is quite straightforward. We will be hearing from the city of Copenhagen and this city, the beautiful city of New York, and then we will also be hearing from this new research project. So it's really going to be a learning exercise this afternoon. But before we go into that, I'd like to give you a little bit of context, of background, why we are doing this right now. And it helps, I think, if I give a little bit background of where I come from. So thank you for introducing me. And then slowly get into that broader context. So UN Nutrition is this mechanism in the UN for the coordination for nutrition. And if you want to do that correctly in a good way, you need to have your knowledge management up to date. So therefore, we track really what is important, what are these emerging or persistent issues that relate to nutrition and other issues that are out there. And one of these issues we found out a couple of years ago, not really found out, but we really delved into, was urban-rural linkages. So we worked with UN Habitat and with a few people in the room here to write this discussion paper about urban-rural linkages. What does it do with food? What are the principles that would help urban-rural linkages to really make a difference for both food and nutrition, but also better governance? So what we found out is that it really helps to make a difference for the Sustainable Development Goals across the board if you make planners, for example, city planners, if you make them work with environmentalists and with nutritionists, because then you get this coherent picture that you really want to make improvements on. Then also in that same discussion paper, we described the way financing could help that, and what types of financing are out there. And that really brings me to where we are going to speak about this afternoon. But before I go there, I already said something about it's important to connect the issues, to connect the problems, and therefore also to connect the solutions, to look at integrated solutions. Where I'm sitting, I often look at global level issues. And when you start integrating issues at global level and you start doing this and this, it becomes a bit cloudy and a bit complex, and sometimes it holds you back. But when you bring that same problem or issue down to local level where the rubber hits the ground, and you work with people that are actually at city level or a local community in a rural area, it's much more, it flows more easily. It's more natural to work together because the issues are closer to the people. So, but a precondition to make that work is that the governance is in order. You need strong local governance, but you also need good national and governance in order to help that local governance build. So these several levels need to work out. So that's why it's so interesting to see that more and more city authorities are now sitting at other tables besides just the table in their own city to really bring these issues to other levels, other governing levels. Okay, so that's one part of the story. Let's now move to food. This week is Climate Week. And we talk a lot about food systems. The Secretary General of the UN says, if you don't improve food systems, you will not achieve the Sustainable Development Agenda. Where I'm sitting, from UN nutrition point of view, we think that food systems should do three things: improve nutrition, better diets, improve the environment, and also improve livelihoods. And in order to do that, you need to find the tipping points, the tools that actually can move the system, shift the system, transform the system in order to achieve these three targets simultaneously. And we found that food-based dietary guidelines with sustainability criteria can help that, because they inform both policymakers, producers, and consumers to take action, very concrete action. But they cannot do it alone. What we also found is, and here we go, is public procurement is really a powerful tool because of the scale and because of the criteria you can set how to use the public money to buy what food with what quality criteria. So that's really a powerful tool. And as mentioned, the good governance and the regulatory framework are extremely important as well. So that's exactly what we are going to discuss this afternoon, this public procurement system. What we also see is, now I get to what I said in the beginning, why now? Public food procurement is getting more and more traction. There is the School Meal Coalition following the Food System Summit from a few years ago. That's really working now with, I believe, around 80 countries by now. And procurement is a powerful tool in that coalition. But there is also the Local Governance Coalition, and there is also the discussions in the Committee on World Food Security that open up more and more to cities and local governments. So I think the moment is really now to discuss these issues, and I really appreciate the room is full, and we have, I don't know how many people we have online, but we do have some people online. So let's go to the actual speakers. So I really like to call on Kate McKenzie. I think we have a very powerful panel with three very powerful ladies. So Kate, I'm not going to read your full bio. If you can, I'm sure if you Google her, you find everything about her. I just want to say that you are the Executive Director of the Mayor's Office of Food Policy. You are the Executive Director of the New York City's Mayor's Office of Food Policy. And I'm so sorry. Do I need to repeat that? Well, no. But I also want to acknowledge that you have been really instrumental and, let's say, a hero when COVID hit, that you really turned around that system of procurement in New York to really support vulnerable people in town. So I'm looking forward to listening to you. Over to you.
It's really wonderful to be here. And I think back about how many years did we talk about this? I think it started during the pandemic. So to have this moment, to be able to talk about this work, especially with my now dear friend and colleague Bettina, it really is a treat. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the context in New York City, our good food purchasing framework. And to start that, it's also a treat to have Fatai, who buys food through our city Department of Citywide Administrative Services, which I'll acknowledge in one moment. Laura, who works within our Department of NYC Aging, and some others here today who work every day with the food policy team to do this work. So I'm going to talk a little bit about food procurement in New York City. And to do that, let's start first with just a little bit about food procurement, right? So some clarifiers. In the city of New York, we buy food and we buy meals. And so I really think it's important to distinguish between those two items. Laura, as an example, organizes procurements to buy meals, and Fatai is actually buying like a grocery list of foods. We have, in any given year, roughly $300 million of a food spend across city agencies, absent any type of emergency. Our current emergency is asylum seekers, where we're feeding more than 112,000 individuals 3 meals a day. As Seneca mentioned, the COVID emergency was a reality as well. In normal times, we're feeding, we feed roughly or provide more than 230 million meals a year with more than 10,000 food service workers. Just, you can read these statistics here, but just to give an illustration of the diversity of spaces in which we operate, from the public schools to juvenile detention centers, 300 older adult centers, and 673 food pantries as an illustration of that diversity. And I'm not, don't worry, going to walk through that scary graphic, but that is just to show that the paths of procurement themselves are wildly convoluted. There are many different types of contracts. We have something called contract direct, which is sort of, of saying I want to buy a specific type of food. Our Department of Education will often utilize that method. Or we could have a distribution contract, which often happens through a classic request for proposals, where we choose to have somebody else buy, store, and distribute foods for us. Laura would oversee in her agency a lot of human service contracts, which are in the case of maybe having a contract with an older adult center to provide anything from yoga classes to seniors, to meals, to any different types of programming at that senior center. So you're actually, the contract is to operate that senior center. And then throughout that, there's food embedded. We also have those competitive sealed bids for specific items, and again, those requests for proposals. So there's about 30 different ways in which food is procured throughout the city. But we also have some food policy supports to operationalize throughout those many different forms of procurement. Seneca mentioned at the global level, trying to marry food standards with sustainability standards, and our New York City standards for foods and meals purchased by city agencies do just that, as well as integrating nutrition standards, grams of added sugar that may or may not be added, milligrams of sodium that can be added. And all of those foods and meals that we are offering must adhere to those standards. We have an executive order that Mayor Adams introduced that requires reporting on where food is coming from for new contracts entered in after May of 2022. And as you'll hear in just a minute, we made through our climate plan commitments to reduce carbon emissions through our food purchases. So we, with the support of many individuals and organizations in this room, operationalize the New York City Good Food Purchasing Framework, which attempts to lift up values of local economies environmental sustainabilities, health and nutrition, animal welfare, and good and strong labor workforce. In New York City, we hold our agencies accountable to specific metrics, and in the sense of, and you'll see some of this come to life in just a moment, data completion. I mentioned for everything that we're buying, we are attempting to procure as much information, shouldn't use procure, to obtain as much information as we possibly can about where that food is coming from. So year-over-year improvements in that data completion is extraordinarily important. From a local economy's perspective, we are looking at the dollar spent on products that contribute to elements of our local economy. Is that business or company located in the state of New York? We're going to focus in a lot on environmental sustainability here, and our metric here is reducing our carbon footprint by 33% by the year 2030. We look for adherence to our nutrition standards. We look for a reduction strategy in animal welfare. And we are really vexed with figuring out how we can at a local level enforce a labor metric that is required at the federal level. So this is an area that we are intimately involved in right now, and it's very challenging. So let's focus, it is, for a few more hours, Climate Week, and we are committed to reducing the carbon footprint of our food, right? And we partner very closely with the World Resources Institute in deep partnership also with the Cool Food Pledge to give them our data and have them analyze our city agencies and aggregate city impacts of our food purchases. This is done with methodology that is peer-reviewed, very highly regarded, and is not specific to where food is coming from. So I really want to call that out as an area where this work might be able to help us go even farther. So again, we're trying to really reduce the amount of carbon that are particularly attributable to dairy and meat coming into our city. And we made this commitment actually at the beginning of Earth Week, where Mayor Adams here introduced our commitments. We're addressing for the first time the connection between our food system and our climate crisis.
It is easy to talk about emissions that are coming from vehicles and how it impacts our carbon footprint. It is easy to talk about the emissions that's coming from buildings, but we now have to talk about beef. The new integrated emission inventory we're unveiling today show that food is the third biggest source of cities' emissions. We already know that a plant-powered diet is better for your physical and mental health. I am living proof of that. But thanks to this new inventory, we're finding out it is better for the planet. That's why today we're committed to reducing the city food emission by 33% by 2030 and challenging our private sector partners to reduce by 25% by 2030. Food has to look good, it has to taste good, and it has to be good for you. We are saying to New Yorkers who are serious about this charge of cleaning up our environment, we now have a new focus that must include food.
So this is a illustration of what we're buying based on our year 2019. We have 3 other years of data to get at this, but if you can see that the small red slice of this circle here represents our food purchases, and in particular those coming from ruminant meats. And then so it's literally 3%. But if you look at the larger piece there, the 42%, it's showing that 42% of our carbon emissions are coming from meat in particular. So this is an area where we're driving the reduction in this, yes, through our food and nutrition standards, but also things like in our public hospitals where we're able to make the plant-based option the default option, and making sure that we are changing our food procurements by not buying as much beef and, where possible, dairy, but also providing the education that goes with that. So We're also trying to change the public narrative about this work, right? And really trying to impress upon people that it is possible, and while all the while stressing that these are choices that people are making. And our role at the Mayor's Office of Food Policy is also to provide information on how we're doing and also the why. So this is a snapshot from our Good Food Purchasing dashboard. That again, this is a snapshot from fiscal 21. You can sort this by agency, by city overall, to really get a sense of what we're buying year over year, and other indicators as well. We also are publicly sharing that tiny little thing on the left there is raw data that every agency is buying. So the line items of the types of food that we're buying, what distributor it's coming from, what manufacturer they got it from, all the way aspirationally to the farm level. And so we're trying to require that from our vendors and shift the way that people are sharing data with us. And again, showing that sort of progress year over year. I believe within the next 3 weeks, we'll be able to upload 22 and 22 data. 23 is just coming in right now. So this is all an effort for us around transparency, around using the power of public procurement to transform the way in which we are buying food to drive both individual, community, and planetary health. Thank you.
Presentation is that you made it look so easy and natural, but also so positive. Like, give people the choice that it's better for their health, it's better for the environment, and it's better for the city. And wow, 1/3 of the city emission is from beef alone. I mean, what I learned is like the food system is contributing for 1/3 to global greenhouse gas emissions. So the entire food system, but here it's only 1/3. Okay. Okay. But it's huge. So thank you for sharing that information. So, okay. Let's go to our next panelist, who is also an amazing expert in this field. Bettina, please take the floor. This is Bettina Bergman-Madsen, who is the Chief Procurement Officer for the municipality of Copenhagen in Denmark. And I only met you yesterday, but you struck me as a very passionate person. And you are really that systematic thinker and planner. That, I mean, it's written here in your bio, but I just wanted to highlight that because it's true. So please, let's take some time and listen to your presentation. The floor is yours.
Thank you for the kind words, and thank you for having me here in New York. I come from the city of Copenhagen in Denmark, and we are so small compared to you guys, like enormously little. It's like a one-person household that doesn't eat that much, actually. So I'm overwhelmed and standing here humble also because what New York City is doing is amazing. And if we can contribute with the experiment that we did in Copenhagen that we succeeded with, it would be fantastic, because then we can prove that it can actually be scaled up and that we can inspire each other to do differently. So I also will always start with this picture, because it could be me when I started working in the city of Copenhagen. I'm trained as a business lawyer, so the rucksack could be the rules and regulations I know and the accountant's methods. But then I look at the mountains, which could be the political obstacles, as I sometimes look at it thinking, oh my God, I have to cross that. I have to put that into the tender and the contracts that I'm making. How am I ever going to do that? But to give you a little context, in 2001, the politicians of Copenhagen decided to go 90% organic. We decided to do that to save the groundwater, because they saw that there were coming more and more pesticides into the water. So they wanted to make sure that we could have clean drinking water in years to come. And then they said, some of the politicians said, well, who says that we're going to buy food from around here? Well, nobody says that, but hey, we are the municipality of Denmark, so we have to be front runners. We want to put a good example, and then It doesn't matter where our food is grown or produced, because then at least we will make sure that it's clean wherever it's grown and produced. So we started the journey saying within 14, 15 years, we wanted to reach the target of 90% organic. And in 2001, we didn't have that much organic produce in Denmark or anywhere else. So we just thought, okay, we'll go out clear and say, this is where we want to go. This is why we want to go there. So they set up a system where we said this has to go hand in hand with training the professional kitchens to cook differently. We want to do it within budget, so they will receive no extra budget to reach the target, but they will receive a lot of training in how to cook differently and how to do more sustainable green meals with less meat, more lentils, and use the waste that we usually have in our kitchens. So we serve approximately 8,000 meals a day, whereas 40,000 daily dinners also, and we buy for around 40 million euros a year. I didn't calculate it to dollars because, but it's approximately the same, I think. And then our spend is actually 10% of all procurement in Denmark. So in Danish context, it actually has an impact what we go do. Just to say that we also report into WRI, we can compare our results with the one that Kate just saw you. And this is actually quite interesting, because if you see that little red slice up there, that's what we buy of beef and things like that. And it also has the red. It could almost be your charter cake, you see? We then have also the green spot, and that's or the yellow spot, and that's our dairy product. Produce the milk and the cheese. We love cheese, so we eat a lot of that too. And then the plant-based and the other products. And if you look at this was after we almost reached our target of 90%, because we are actually 86% organic now in our public meals. And this is from 2001. We are working on the new results, the new data, like Kate also. I think we probably got them around the same time, and we will probably also publish them around the same time, and then we'll see how the results are, because we worked so much more. Because now we are not just going organic. We don't actually talk about going organic anymore. Now we talk about being more sustainable. Organic and more sustainable. How can we do that? How can we go more plant-based? This is what we talk about in Copenhagen right now. So we also made a food strategy. It came out in 2019. So even though we had the target of 90% organic, we did not have a food strategy. So this is brand new for us. And we link it also with dietary guidelines from the ministry. But our food approach is to cook healthy meals on site. So we have chefs hired by the municipality that cook the meals in kindergartens and in some schools. And here we try to bring the children on board to help cook on site. We try to do the seating around the table together with the personnel of the institutions, both in kindergartens, but also in elderly homes and home for social vulnerable people. And we also believe that it helps bringing the people on board to cook. So why is a procurement officer like me talking all about this food? It's because I don't see my job done well before they're served a healthy, sustainable meal at the plate of the citizen, and that it's eaten with joy. And I'm one of the wheels in this. And if my wheel is not spinning well enough, then nobody else can do their job good enough, because then there's something missing in the chain. So this is my passion. I love my job. It's the best in the world. So I also love my politicians because they have high ambitions. Here you can see a list of all the ambitions they have. And this list is what I try to and manage to put into our procurement. We looking into packaging, so we get the most clean packaging and reduce packaging. So we do not have that much packaging if we can. We look at green vehicles, try to have no flight policy. We look at sustainable palm oil and soya, fairly traded certified goods. And then we look also at the nutrition into procurement. We make sure like Kate said, we have two kind of contracts, one where you procure for catering and one where you procure for food. So this is really important because, of course, when you procure for catering, you can ask for how the meal is composed and how it's cooked and everything. But you can also, in these procurement where you ask for catering, ask what kind of food are you doing? Are you making sure that we have sustainable and diversity into the meals that you serve for us? So some of these things are really important. So, that's the procurement officer's role. Either you go to the green side or you go to the dry land, okay? We can be one of the key factors to change this. This is why I love my job. Because I really, when I wake up in the morning, I feel that I have a purpose in my life. I have a purpose, of course, my children and my husband, but also my job. Like I can actually make sure that we go more to the green side than to the dry land. We made a potato tender. Yeah, it's a potato tender, but we actually made it directly to the farmer. He go online. Also, we linked it with teaching of the kids. So he goes online to tell the kids about what a brilliant job he has. He also thinks that his job is the best in the world because he produces potatoes to the kids in Copenhagen and the elderly and so on, but also to the kids. And when we gave the kids a bucket where they can plant a potato, it grows, they harvest it, and some of them even go to visit the farm. And when the kid, they got out of the bus, say, "Hey, you're that famous guy from YouTube." So he was like, "Okay, yeah, hi, welcome to my farm, help me harvest potatoes." They harvest their own potatoes in the bucket, but they also harvest at the farm, and they sorted it out in sizes and stuff and learned much about why is it sorted out in sizes and what do we do with the very big potatoes and with the very small one, and do we have food waste already at the farm site? So it's hard to learn them about this. I think this is really important. And luckily our ministry also think that. So they made dietary guidelines that we have to follow. And as you see up here, the meat is very little. Very, very little. You should go in and read them if you like nutrition and things like that, because they're actually really interesting, because they also linked it to sustainability. But I am one of the lucky food procurement officers, because here the key is food procurement officer. That is what I do. I only do food procurement. Many procurement officers, they do diapers, road salt, heavy machinery, and so on and so forth. How should they know everything about food system and nutrition that is to know? I don't even know that, and I worked since 2009 on these issues. So we created this National Food Procurement Officer Network in Denmark, where we talk about how to create sustainable food procurement, and we share ideas on how to write the criteria, because when you're a lawyer, the devil's in the detail, like in many other lines of profession, but especially in law, it's written there, so you kind of have to know it. So we also made this teaching material. It's in English. I created it together with WHO in a project called Best Remap, where you can actually read how we wrote the criteria into the procurement. And then my last slide will be, we did a EU Food Procurement Officer group together also with the Commission. So now we're starting to walk together through the mountains, not alone with my rucksack. Now we are more hiking together, and it's so much more fun. And that's why I'm so happy to be here, because now we can be even more walking together in the mountains. So we have a One Planet network. So let's share ideas. Let's do this together. Thank you, and contact me if you have any more questions. Okay.
Thank you so much. That was very much inspiring. And thank you for that. Like Kate, you also made it sound so easy and also made it sound funny. I mean, it's fun to do this work. It's like you are an example of a passionate person. And what I also appreciated is I think you're one of the few people who actually love politicians. So that thank you for that. But what I wanted to say, linked to that, is that you actually linked those global targets, the SDGs, with the local objectives in the municipality of Copenhagen. And I think that's also what we are trying to do, link these several layers of governance in our work. So thank you for doing that. And linking your two presentations, I think both of you are very data-driven and also very transparent about those data. And I think that is also a factor of success, if I may say so. I think so. But anyway, over to our last speaker, Becca Jablonski, who is the co-director of the Food System Institute of Colorado State University and associate professor and food systems extension economist in the Department of Agriculture and Resort Economics and a Fulbright Fellow. And there's much more, of course. I think you are going to introduce us to the new research program. And I think what I will also appreciate to listen to is that you will also link it to earlier research you did in, was it Denver? Mm-hmm. Okay, the floor is yours.
It's wonderful to be here with you all, with this incredible panel. As Kate said, we've been working to try to get this project off the ground for a few years now, and to actually have the chance to launch it here with an incredible team. We've just had a packed day and a half. I worked everybody really, really hard of meetings, and just couldn't be more excited and really grateful to FAR and to Rockefeller for supporting this work. So as you've heard, right, New York City and Copenhagen, but many, many cities across really the world are leveraging procurement to try to meet a variety of sustainable development goals. And there's lots of ways that I could talk about this right now. I mean, so Copenhagen talks specifically about, organic and really trying to leverage the power of organic procurement. What I thought I'd do today is actually talk a little bit about a local. So you heard Kate say that New York City, for the local economies piece, is measuring how much of that procurement is coming from New York. So the thing is that it's very challenging to actually do this evaluation to understand what is the impact. How are we doing in terms of achieving these different sustainable development goals through especially local procurement? So I've been part of farm to school research, which of course is a subset of leveraging municipal procurement for a number of years. And farm to school, I'm going to talk about that specifically, has been leveraged to meet a number of these goals. So for example, around zero hunger or good health and well-being. But the first challenge is that doing research in schools is really difficult. So even though we have cities that really try to set some of the procurement, that there's sometimes changes that happen which make doing these really rigorous experiments difficult. And so as a result, there are almost no rigorous research studies that take place in the school environment. And you can see this Euclid diagram right there with the crazy numbers and colors is actually depicting the total number of these rigorous peer-reviewed studies that we have. And sort of the takeaway from this is that there's really no doubt that having meals in schools is really beneficial from a health perspective, right? That's true. But there's little evidence that adding local into those school meals really makes it go further to achieve those kinds of health outcomes. And further, part of the challenge is that there may be trade-offs because that locally procured items may actually be more expensive. There may be more transaction costs, right? So it actually takes more time and energy to procure from lots of different sources, or say we only want this to come from specific places in New York State. So that can be, right, a challenge associated with trying to leverage local. We also see in terms of this decent work and economic growth, right, it's not clear that, for example, in a place like New York, where you may have this 30% incentive at the state level, right, or some additional incentives at the city level, that gets passed on to producers to the extent that that's the goal, right? So we have a smaller number of intermediaries that are actually supplying that food to the schools or other agencies. And we have a lot of farmers, right, that may be into that chain. So do we think that actually there's enough of those distributors or enough of that demand that premium is actually going to be passed on to producers? There's also the potential that through these sort of local strategies that we have something called beggar thy neighbor, right? So maybe if we're just procuring from New York, it actually negatively impacts New Jersey as an example, right? And how do we sort of think about making sure that we are promoting all of us in doing this work? And another challenge is that sometimes, it's the cities that maybe hold more power, especially as we have more and more of our population that lives in urban places. And so how do we make sure that there's communication that's happening across cities and the region, right? So do we have the people who would be directly or indirectly impacted by some of these policies at the table? Then in terms of the Sustainable Development Goal 12, right, thinking about responsible consumption and production, it's really unclear what this relationship between local and environmentally sustainable or environmentally friendly is, right? So just because we have an item that's grown or raised in New York State does not mean it's inherently more sustainable than one that would be grown or raised in New Jersey, for example, right, or somewhere else. There's also an unclear relationship and not really research around local procurement and food waste, as well as thinking about the transportation footprint. And really, we've had a lot of research over the last decade, particularly in that space, right, around this whole food miles discussion and debate. So all of this isn't to say that, trying to leverage procurement to meet these sustainable development goals isn't going to actually work. It just means that there's a lot of questions and that more research is needed. And particularly as we have more and more cities in the United States that are implementing these good food procurement policies, good food purchasing policies, we really want to do the digging to understand what is the impact. And one of the things that I think is critical to understand here is that the impact is not the same across different places, and that really understanding and digging down into our ability to leverage public food procurement to meet these sustainable development goals depends on our ability to understand the local context, right? And so that's a really critical piece. So in this new project, what we're really trying to understand are what are the regional socioeconomic and environmental impacts and trade-offs of these public food procurement policies. And I want to be really clear that I'm a researcher and that my job is not to say to a city like New York, well, this is how you do it. This is going to be the better way to do it. Rather, we know that there are trade-offs that are going to occur, and it's going to be ultimately up to the city to make those decisions based on what their values are, right? So it may be more important at certain moments in time to prioritize environmental sustainability over other kinds of outcomes, and that is absolutely fine. Again, that's really a values judgment. There's not necessarily a right or wrong answer. So I've been fortunate to work with a big team, mostly at Colorado State University, over the last 5 years with funding from the Foundation for Food and Ag Research to help Denver to understand some of the impacts of their implementation of the Good Food Purchasing Program. So the mayor of Denver signed the Denver Food Vision in 2017, and one of the goals was around local procurement. So you can see 25% of all food purchased by public institutions would come from Colorado. It's mostly cities that are setting these policies, like in Denver and like you're hearing today from Copenhagen and New York City. And so really thinking about what's the relationship between the city and the impacted region. In this case, you can look at the map of Colorado. We have almost all of our population that's concentrated along what we call the Front Range, which is really where Denver is and Colorado Springs and Fort Collins, Colorado. And even though we do not have many farms in Denver, they're very important, I think, from an educational perspective, but they're not going to be able to grow enough of the food to meet that 25% goal, right? You can see the largest farm in Denver, according to the Census of Agriculture, had just over $100,000 in gross cash farm income. So one of the things that we've been trying to do through this work is actually to bring city and regional stakeholders together. And of course, you're very lucky in this state because Kate and her team have been doing a fantastic job for a number of years of trying to cultivate those kinds of relationships. But that really wasn't happening in Denver before this project. And so what we were able to do is actually, during the period of the funding, have Denver hire an employee whose job it was to curate this Good Food Purchasing Program coalition, which brought together city stakeholders and buyers with regional actors. And actually, one of the cool things that's come out of this project is that the city and county of Denver has continued to fund that position, recognizing the importance of these regional linkages. So in our project, we focused on a couple commodities. I'll just highlight potatoes and beef here. And there's a number of reasons why we selected those. And so if you have some questions, I'm happy to answer them. But what we tried to understand, and if you look at the left-hand side, you can sort of see that, is what happens, what are sort of some of the trade-offs or impacts based on different ways that the Good Food Purchasing Program could be implemented within the city and county of Denver. And I don't have a ton of time here, so I just want to highlight that sort of as I alluded to, what we see is that there are indeed these trade-offs that happen. And the trade-offs occur across different economic dimensions, across different environmental dimensions. And so understanding these types of trade-offs and therefore providing that information to the city around what they value, I think is really important so that they can sort of better think through what some of those trade-offs might be. Or they have the ability then to leverage other types of policies or programs to think about, well, how do we maybe mitigate some of those potentially negative effects that could occur from some of these other policies? So as I mentioned, one of the cool things is that we have the continuation of this Good Food Purchasing Program Coalition. You can see more on the website for the City and County of Denver about this. And I think that through those conversations that have happened at the coalition, that there's really a number of differences that are taking place around how the city's thinking about implementation. And we could talk more about that. So with this new project, we get to focus on New York City, which I think our team is just so excited about. You know, one of the most exciting pieces, and you could just see it light up in our team's faces during the discussions with Kate and her team, is the scale at which purchasing is occurring, right? New York City is just it's unlike any other city in the ability to really make some of these changes based on the kinds of policies and programs that you all decide to implement. So here we're focused on a few commodities, beans, beef, and lettuce. And we're focused on those for a number of reasons that I'm happy to discuss, but they boil down to the fact that New York City does some significant purchasing within those commodities and that they have the potential to actually positively impact New York State farmers, ranchers, communities, as well as some of the supply chain businesses. So with that, I'm just going to say a huge thank you, especially to the team at Colorado State University that conducted that first project in Denver, as well as to some of our funders. And I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Thank you so much also for this presentation. And I think what you did was already kind of wrapping up also the other two presentations. I liked how you mentioned that this type of food procurement is already, let's say, proliferating in various areas and cities in the US. As you also said, Bettina, it's like you have this local network of procurement offices in Denmark, and then you're also now reaching out to the European Union. So that's really like, it's getting everywhere. So that's really, really exciting. And now with this research, with all the potential, the research questions, it's like, oh, okay. So I would like to open up for discussion, and I see already some hands, so I will not read my own questions then. I also would like to apologize because I have my cell phone here, and I am going to look on it every now and then, and that's because I need to check if there's any questions online. So it's not to try to be impolite, it's try to be practical. I see one question over there, I'm just checking, and 1 and 2 over there. So you first.
These mics work?
Yeah, you press the button.
Okay, can you hear me now? Okay. Hi. So thank you all for some incredible presentations. So great to see this work begin to be integrated and not siloed across different cities in the country. I'm an academic. I'm a climate researcher at New York University, and my name is Matthew Hayek. So I know a lot about siloing. And I'm also curious because we have a non-US perspective here in the form of Bettina. I was wondering if you could say anything about lessons that you're learning with Copenhagen to link back up to the federal government and across the European Union. In particular, something that really discourages me is the major gap between our average diets, both in the US and much of continental Europe, and the dietary recommendations. Denmark has much more kind of forward-looking and evidence-based dietary recommendations than the United States does, but it's the gap between is still large in both countries. So I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about your efforts to communicate some of this to the national government and between the national and the European level as well. And in particular, if you've seen or know of anything encouraging in terms of bringing farm and food policy at the national or regional level in line with the dietary requirements. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that question. While you chew on that, I'll give the floor to 2 more questions. So we'll take, let's say, 3 questions, and then we go back to the panelists. So I'll see you, but I promise these people here, that was you in the white T-shirt, and there was another, and then you, and then we'll come back to you later.
Hi, Julia McCarthy with New York Health Foundation. I'm also curious about what's happening in Copenhagen, specifically about the National Procurement Officer Network, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about that, to know number one, do you have financial and political support for that? And number two, if you mentioned that the procurement officers were not always just focused on food, and that's often the case in the U.S. And so through that network, have you been able to build momentum for like food specific officers? And now are they more food specific officers? Sorry, longer question than I meant.
No worries. Do try to keep your questions a bit concise. And also, there's 2 more panelists here. So, but I understand the curiosity, of course, too, for Denmark. I'm curious for the US. I'm also from Europe. Anyway, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Scott Bryson from Orbital Farm. Really glad to be here and having this conversation. I think this is well needed, and thank you for doing this in a public setting. Getting a little bit of feedback, but if you can hear me okay. I think the procurement of food through longer term purchase agreements is a major driver for economic development locally, and also for agriculture transition into more sustainable practices. So I would love for the panelists to have a discussion about how implementing longer-term purchase agreements for food to support farmers in transition to more sustainable fertilizer products, to more sustainable practices, to support agrivoltaics on farmers and the procurement of these food products locally. I think this is a major driver for economic development in every city across the planet. And we're not doing it very well, and we're not supporting our farmers. So I would love to hear how that plays into procurement, because it's not normal in the food system. Thanks.
Thank you. That is a very excellent question. So I suggest we first go to Bettina and then to the other 2 panelists to address the other questions. And then also you get a chance to speak to that. So over to you.
Thank you. Wow, good questions. The very concrete one, the Food Procurement Officer Network, because that's easy for me to talk about, because that's also one of my babies that I really love, because we created the Food Procurement Officer Network to more easily share knowledge amongst procurement officers, because if I was to do textile procurement, I would be lost. But I know a lot about food, so I thought, why not? Then I talked with our ministry, actually. So it's owned by the ministry, but chaired by me. So I do like the agenda and call for and talk with people and things, but ministry is always present at our meetings. So it is anchored at the ministry. And we see it works. And often procurement officers, they come in and out of the network when they do procurement of food. They join. When not, then they are off a little bit and then they come back again, because they always receive the invitations. So if they are focused on road salt and don't have time for food, then they just come back when they're ready. But we have meetings every 2nd month, every 3rd month. When it's running right now, we had a quiet period because we have been way too busy, all of us. But now there's some different food procurement been done that's interesting. So we gather again and then we start to continue, because there's a lot going on in Europe about minimum mandatory criteria at the EU level where they want to involve food procurement officers, and I'm involved in that, so I can share with the rest of the Danish network easily. So this is simple, but that then links to your questions, because how do we make sure that we coordinate all this? There's a gap. Yes, it's right, and there's also a gap on down to the public plate. And to the private plate, even bigger gap. How do we minimize that? We try to make recipes actually in Copenhagen. We are just about, and this is, I don't know, I don't think it's secret. Well, anyway, it's the States, okay. So we're just about to launch a big campaign on how we can use more lentils and grains and eat more plant-based meals. It will be on, I think, the web, so everybody can use it, and a lot of recipes that will be done in the public side. But it's not done by that, because how to make sure that we communicate it to private people. But that links actually back to what we did with the network. Because how do you ensure that all the good guidelines, all the scientists, that goes back to your question here, how do we make sure that knowledge about agriculture or anything lands at the procurement officer's desk so we can do something about it? I have not got the key yet. I'm working on it. I'm trying. I collect knowledge, and that's why I'm so happy to be invited to this project, because I actually think that this could be one of the keys that we need so badly to solve some of the problems together, so that we make sure that we weave the whole chain into the changes, and that when I then do my procurement out of my crazy ideas, then I don't do wrong and harm something at the farm side or harm something at the political level that I didn't know of. So I think that was it for me.
I think I want to start with your question here, because there's a thread that I think connects throughout all of this, which is, and I'm really glad again that Fatai is here, Ben, who is working from Karen Carpin Partners, who works with our city agencies, Laura, who's, part of this is we don't have food procurement specialists, right? And that is, I think, what is developing from, and by I mean special, like Fatai is a specialist, and he's also a specialist for every other kind of commodity that he's procuring as well. And so what we are finding is that there is a lot of expertise, know-how, new tricks to the trade that need to be developed that are changing norms and systems and traditions in some cases that have not been changed before. And so the idea that you suggested of, I mean, it's not new, right? But like forward contracting for farms has not been done by a municipality. And so those are the kinds of things that we need to keep being persistent about. And, things like a pandemic and an asylum seeker crisis get in the way. But they don't fall too far to the side. It's just we have a finite number of contracting agents who are now procuring many, many other things. But it is through these types of networks, and it is why I am so excited to be able to think about, working within procurement experts to take what's working, or frankly, I get more benefit from knowing what's not working in other areas to know how to experiment with it here. I think another thing is also about, and this is sort of weedsy, but we have some pretty archaic and rigid ways in which our procurement laws are written and really hard to change. But food is considered in many cases a good and not a service. And we need to really think about how we are changing food to be a service that's different from ideally paper cups to serve things. It feeds our economies, it feeds our health, it employs different kinds of people. Those are the things that are the values that are attributable to our procurements, and that's the big hill that I hope we are all starting to climb. Matt, you raised a question which I think is really important about how we're connecting to as a government, and I think Mayor Adams says this very well, we will not use our resources to feed the healthcare crisis. What people do with their own wallets and their own dollars is their own decisions, and we are trying to nudge people in the direction with more and more types of information to inform those decisions. But when it is using a public procurement, we need to use those dollars wisely, given that particularly our healthcare crisis and our climate emergency are things that we're going to end up paying for at the end of the day, or at the end of 10 years or whatever it's going to be. So I think that I'm actually curious, maybe for a later conversation, but Seneca as it relates to Denmark and the connections between health policy and procurement policy, that's a really interesting direction.
I'll just add to your comment. So I agree with you, and I think that there are some real opportunities for procurement to support local economic development, right? There's a lot of these sort of food system strategies. I think one thing we need to be cautious about, though, is that getting a product from the farm into a New York City agency is not an easy thing to do, and it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. And I think increasingly, and particularly in Colorado, there's a number of discussions around we're trying to leverage like farm-to-school procurement to support market opportunities for small and mid-scale producers. Rather, what I think we should be doing is better developing direct market opportunities or helping with some technical assistance around food safety training, right? All of these other pieces, so that once we have farms of a certain scale and who've been around for a little while, that we can figure out then how to get those products into schools. So I just think it's right-size strategy that we need to be thinking about, not a sort of one-size-fits-all approach. And actually, just one other quick thing for over here. Bettina and I are involved in a project that's funded by the European Commission called Food Trails. So it's a Horizon 2020 project. And it's been really cool to see. I mean, Bettina's been more involved than I have been. But one of the things they do is they have cities that are sort of paired with each other. So, for example, I think Copenhagen, you went and visited Milan, or Milan visited you. And so it's a way for cities to really learn from each other. And I haven't seen that happen as much in the U.S. And I have not seen it happen really at all between the U.S. and a lot of these places that are just doing incredible work. And I think we have some real opportunities there.
I think, Kate, you mentioned you were already going to do that, right? These learning networks. Exactly. Okay.
But I think also, like, again,
you need to
be able to talk more in depth about things that I don't know about how procurements can actually be operationalized. And then again, to do these learning journeys to see in the flesh how things are working at a school, at a hospital. We last January hosted a delegation from Denmark in our public hospital culinary center. So those are things that I think are really beneficial.
Yeah, thanks. I think this knowledge element is essential. The three of you keep mentioning it, and I also hear the questions in the room. So before I go back to the room, I'd like to flag a question or several questions, similar questions that came out online. And that's basically for about the city of New York, but so for UK, but also in the context of your research. How New York is planning to communicate with rural actors, including smaller farmers and other food chain actors. So is that on your radar? And then maybe also in the context of the research. And I'm sure that you would also have something to say about that in Denmark. Kate,
Sure.
Over to you.
Sure. So part of the motivation for publishing all of the procurements that we're making is to actually show what it is that we're buying. And again, like when you actually look, and Becca shared some really great slides earlier in the week about, and you highlighted them here, it was vegetable, beans, and beef. And these are where there's real opportunity within New York State. But you just said it, like, let's not it is a romantic idea about taking farm fresh product and then seeing it on a school plate. There are a lot of steps in between. And so, we are also, we do want to do more business with food in particular that's coming from New York State, and how we can make sure that we're communicating when we're buying different things. But again, a lot of the volume that we're buying is actually not purchases from New York City, it's from our distributors. So really trying to, again, showcase how our procurements happen so that and I really want to put a big capital I, capital F, individuals want to do business with the city of New York, they can opt into doing that. But, we don't always pay right away, right? There's a lot of things that have to, who frankly wants to do business with the city of New York, and being really clear about what that looks like so that you can choose to do this. But I do think, I really want to appreciate my colleague Milagros, who we support our regional, we have a regional food working group. I was just up in the west of Hudson watershed, we invest hundreds of millions of dollars in our watersheds to do what your whole motivation for the organics was to protect your water supply. And we have a pristine watershed, especially because we are supporting farm level best management practices to make sure that continues to be the case. So our connections are, those are environmental policies that are also food policies that are also looking at our carbon footprint. So there's a lot of ways that are not particularly obvious for how we are connecting with our rural communities, but we are absolutely in dialogue and conversation and always looking to be an even better partner.
just to say that we aren't sure yet about what that communication strategy should look like because, as Kate said, we definitely do not want to overpromise, right? This is not like necessarily going to be the right market opportunity for lots of folks. And so we want to think about, okay, how do we actually get feedback and understand how some producers or supply chain businesses might respond if the city decides to pursue, these different types of strategies? What is the kind of information that they would need to make those decisions? We know that most producers are not profit maximizers. In fact, so for example, in the Colorado project, we saw that there was a lot of opportunity around organic wheat, right? And we can show that most years it's really much more profitable to produce organic wheat, and that one of really the drivers of whether or not a grower was going to transition in a dryland farming system, which is a challenge, was really around what their neighbors were doing, right? So it was like, is it culturally acceptable to grow organic wheat in that case? And so we want to understand those kinds of things that are important to people and how they make decisions. And I think that's going to help drive the decisions around what that communication strategy looks like.
Back to questions from the room. Checking, there's quite a few. So I'll take again 3, and I see more hands. So I promised you some time ago, and then I'll go to the lady with the beautiful necklace, and then I'll go to you, and then maybe I hope there will be time for another round. Please go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Emily. I'm all the way from Malaysia. I'm a visiting professional fellow under YCE, funded by the State of Department. Very glad to be here with you guys. I'm curious, for example, when we say we want to change to a more sustainable food policy in terms of, consciously not choosing beef, for example, as a poultry choice, how do you convince leaders? Because, in Malaysia, I think it's very similar in US and Europe as well. Beef is such a big culture of the food, right? And how do you convince the leader to kind of change this policy? And my second question is related to this as well, in terms of how do we address the economic impact that will be affecting the poultry industry in this policy? For example, the beef industries. How do we help them in this transition? Thank you.
Let's first take the 3 questions. So please go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much. These are really terrific presentations. So my name is Mia. I'm based here in New York City. I'm here with colleagues who are doing global work, and I also do global work, and I'm a colleague of Matthew's at NYU as an adjunct. But I'm wondering, because we work with organizations in China who work on food systems, and we're also quite involved in the UN Food System Summit, also the UN Climate Summit. And I'm wondering, given you all are presumably phenomenally busy, you and your teams, but how could these kind of examples be shared more globally? Even though we know everything is very specific to where we are. But I took a lot of pictures of the slides, and I feel like, wow, I could see mayors in China being really fascinated by this, both the successes and the internal challenges. So that might be a longer discussion. Maybe we talk after this, but wondering for even the UN Climate Summit coming up in UAE, where there will be more on food, finally, someone's been working on that for many years, how we might share this more. And I know you probably do some of that already, but I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And let's take the last question before we go back to the panelists.
Thank you. My name is Angela Hansen. I'm the founder of Food Systems Foresight, and I think I'll ask probably the 3rd international question in a row, which maybe is great. You guys can all take your international hats. I'm curious about, I see the power of good food purchasing and really centralizing that power and talking about the role of a food procurement officer. And I'm curious about something that I heard the other day when I was interviewing someone working in social protection in Nigeria. I was working with the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition on a project around nutrition-sensitive social protection. So that's like our food stamps or SNAP here in the U.S. Social protection is kind of a broad term that includes a lot of the things we do to offer a safety net. And this person was talking to me about how in Nigeria, they make direct payments to the school cook and give usually her a responsibility for a number of students that she must feed with a given amount of money. So 100 students, $100, off you go. Bob's your uncle. Feed them for a week with this food. Buy it locally, prepare it based on preferences, so extremely context adapted. I'm curious if any of the good food purchasing frameworks talk about when central is most powerful and when decentralizing purchasing is the right choice.
Yes, I would like to start because I'll do kind of short. First of all, I'll say one interesting thing about what Kate talked about before, about how who want to work with the government, like you said, because we allow CPS. We see exactly the same in Denmark, actually. And also we have the same issues with farmers where we cannot get the crops into the kitchen because there's soil on. So it's really concrete things that can then become troublesome when we are a municipality. That goes actually right back to you, because we also had this discussion years ago. Would it be more sensible to centralize or decentralize the budget to the kitchen so they have responsibility themselves? In Copenhagen, they decide themselves what to buy, when to buy, but not where to buy. I do the contract. So I just have to make sure that everything is included there so that they can buy what they need. So we create a network of kitchen staff. So we make sure that they tell us what to put on the contract. So that's how we do it but we had the discussion, and sometimes we do still have kitchen staff saying, I could do it better myself. I can go to the supermarket and I can do better. And then we talk about, well, will you have that responsibility? Will you know where the goods come from? Will you make sure that it's fairly traded if we have a requirement for that? Will you make sure that you get the organic stamps and so on and so forth? And then kind of like they see that it's good to do the centralized procurement in this case. We share these things internationally. Like I said before, I'm working also with the Commission to create the new mandatory criteria. They test, like say we have this idea of how would it look from a procurement officer's side. So because I am a civil servant, so I actually do not have a political view on things. I just say how would it look from my professional side. And then I work together with the WHO and FAO also to see if we can. Because I'm so scared, what if all Europe suddenly asks for sustainable palm oil? How would it affect the rest of the world? I would not know from my spot. So we need to share this knowledge. But we also need to share this knowledge so that others also can do more green, more sustainable procurement.
Yes. This question, I think, is really interesting, and it's vexing because I think we've got, as I meant, it wasn't really a joke, but we have 30 different ways in which we are procuring. So from a very high level, it makes it very challenging to do data analysis because it introduces so many other complexities to how you're tracking the different things. But certainly, I'll use schools as an example. There's a lot of differing levels of control that principals can exert, and in some ways, that is interesting to see how things can be different at a school level. So I just think what you said, there's lots of different ways to do the work, and I think it's there's many different questions that we're trying to answer too, but I think it's a both and. Centralized works in some ways, decentralized works in others. I want to come back to this question over here because, both of our slides, the pie chart circular figure mirrored the same thing. We were buying 3% of our food purchases were ruminant meats. So even if we reduce even more, it's not going to be a market disruptor. And that, we're also not ever talking about eliminating. We are talking about introducing, putting a cap on the number of times something can be served a week, which is very different than saying never. And we are not at all even entertaining that, right? So this is all about a reduction that's driven by data around healthcare costs and carbon costs as well. So I think, to your point, we're going to talk about city procurements. We are not under any veil of disbelief that we're going to disrupt the market here. And if anything, we're hoping to draw more, improvements again in other proteins within the state. But we are, again, we're kind of as low as we can get. And part of that is changing, again, particularly from, I will say, a culinary training perspective about really encouraging and supporting workers in training and developing on new skills for what they're doing, which is culinary arts and culinary training. So that's how I would come to that. And, again, like we're not talking about elimination. We're talking about introducing new minimums for plant-based proteins in particular. There was a second question, and I don't remember it.
I think
Okay, good.
Is the mic on? Yes, so good. So there was a different question online, but it's related in the sense that what you just touched on is kind of the meat question is a hot potato. So the other hot potato here online is there is a lot of discussion about the role of local food in addressing climate change. So is that what is the so-called food miles? And it sounds like there is not much research there yet. So maybe you could comment on that. Are there studies yet or definite findings that you could share?
There is actually a lot of research on that. And of course, my friend and colleague Jasmine Dillon over there would be much better prepared to speak to that. But I would say overall, it's pretty overwhelming that the food miles debate has kind of been debunked. I mean, it's not, we're really not looking at local being necessarily better from an emissions perspective. It's more complex than that. In fact, another colleague who was just at our meeting, Miguel Gomez, was presenting some of the data about getting lettuce from New York versus having lettuce shipped in from California, and looks like California outperforms the local lettuce. So it's more complex than just reduced transportation miles.
Absolutely, thank you so much. So I see, we have 8 minutes left, and I see more than 8 hands. So let's take 2 more. Don't shoot me. It's random, right? So, okay, one on this side, and then the lady in the back on the. Oh no, sorry, I really promised him before. Sorry about that. So I have a lady and a gentleman.
Anne Ribka gets a question.
Okay. Hi. Thanks so much. It's really interesting. My name is Sarah Eckhouse. I work at Food Shop Global. I'm curious about cost and how much flexibility there is with cost, because I think when you talk about the true cost of food, of course, Rockefeller Foundation did a big report. It's 3 times what we pay for it, but city budgets are limited. Procurement, you can't spend forever. So when you're trying to get food that has better environmental results and better labor practices behind it, how much flexibility do you have in cost? I know in a lot of cases, like at USDA contracts, you have to take the lowest bid. Do you have flexibility to impose standards like that?
So that's why, we want to do 3 questions. Yeah.
My name is Stephen Cutter. I'm just a passionate food guy for the last decade or so. Thought a lot about how food systems can expand locally, regeneratively, organically. I think using the kids as a education source to teach them how to grow food is a big component of that. To create local jobs and local food helps with the carbon footprint and everything in between. My question, you guys, have you guys looked into gamifying this aspect for kids to learn how to grow their own food and create their own jobs and commerce, all from video games?
I'm only laughing because I have a son who plays a lot of Farm Simulator.
Yeah. You promised there was going to be one last question. Yeah, okay. So, please, but be brief.
It'll be very quick, I promise. Hi, everyone. Thank you for this panel. This has been great to also just have in conversation on an international and national level some of the very just distinct differences that y'all are navigating in your respective cities, but also the parallels. And I also just wanted to zero in on one of the questions that you posed, Becca, to to us and to the work that you're doing around, navigating the socioeconomic and environmental trade-offs when contending with these food procurement shifts. So, I'm just curious as to what extent, the discourse around contending with those trade-offs has been in conversation with contending with also the future forward-looking positive, oftentimes quantifiable impacts on our society, things like reduction of burden on our healthcare sector, or, just creating more stable opportunities for small and BIPOC farmers to have stable opportunities in our marketplace, or just responding to the climate crisis. And I think the benefit of the Good Food Purchasing Framework is that because it's a flexible metrics-based framework, it allows, us to contend with the present day realities while being in conversation with the future realities. And I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Ripka Getacho, and I'm the director of the New York Good Food Purchasing Program campaign. Thank you for the question.
Thank you so much. So let me just set the rules of the game again, because I'll give you, the three of you, each 1 minute to respond to all those questions. Then I will summarize in 1 minute, and then we'll hand back to Milagros to sketch the next step. So
I'll start with Rivka's question. I think that we are not in a place where we can even have some of those conversations because there is so much distrust across the food system. And it's really, I think it hinders our ability to think through some of those values questions. And we've been dealing with this a lot in Colorado. And unfortunately, I think even some of the language within the Good Food Purchasing Program makes it difficult to get certain stakeholders at the table. And at the same time, there's so many questions. So how do we start? By bringing people together in a way where we can acknowledge that distrust that exists and try to start thinking about, okay, what reparations need to happen, and then how can we actually think about having conversations that are going to help us think through some of those long-term issues you're talking about.
The question about essentially best value, it is an area of deep focus. We have a state bill that is trying to update our procurements to allow for that. So it gets back to that goods versus service. And again, from a federal level, state and local level, we just need some procurement reform to actually consider food differently. And I think the gaming question is really smart. I would not rely on government to do it.
And I will go straight to the question about how we put things out for tender, because we always do best value. So not the lowest bid. It's food that we're buying. And we also talk about the true cost of food. So what bid comes in, we are also looking at the budget models. How can we make sure that we have enough money in our institutions to cook for? But of course, we are also municipalities, so we have to keep the budget low. And I work in the budget department, so that's and we always have to look at, can we cut that budget also with our tenders? This is the reality. Every time we make a new tender, we look at, is there savings? Because then we can use the savings for something else. That's nice, but actually, you can do that because when we put, for example, a criteria where we help the supplier to cut back on their food waste, then they save money and they share it with us. If we make them go in a straight line instead of going like a star around the city, wasting CO2 and not driving, then they save money, environment, and that helps us also to gain a more efficient, economic efficient contract. So some of these things you can actually think smart. It doesn't have to be expensive to be more green.
Seneca, just quick point I forgot to mention. In hospitals, we reduced by 59 cents a meal, particularly because we were buying plant-based proteins, which are less in cost than meat.
And it was what Rivka was saying, these are benefits that can be quantified in the end. It's just we have to value them correctly.
Wow. This is amazing. I think we need another 1.5 hours to There's enough. I mean, there's many questions, and I really apologize to the people who I've not been able to give the floor, including the people online. But let me try to give you like a 1, 2, 3 sentence summary of this meeting before I hand over back to Milagros. I think what we have been discussing were the factors of success. How can we make these public procurement programs a success? And I heard many hurdles. One of the hurdles is the procurement officers are not specialists. So we spoke a lot about knowledge management, and for that we need solid data. So I think that's one of the areas the three of you are working on, and it's really one element of a factor that we need to be there in order to be successful. Then another one is, you mentioned quite late in the conversation, trust. And what we mentioned earlier in the conversation was communication. There was a lot of, you mentioned it in the questions, in your presentation, communication between the rural area, the city area, communication between several procurement officers, communication between several levels, from here to Europe, to international, to global level. So that communication is essential to learn, to build that knowledge again, but also to build trust. And just like a side loop, communication is also through the environmental problems. Like in New York, in Denmark, it started because of the water problem. So the environment communicated with the people, we have to change something. And in fact, it's also the same here in New York City. Then finally, thank you, Kate, for saying that the goods should be, food is a good, but it should be a service. And I'd like to add on there, actually, adequate food is a human right. So that's what we are all working towards, realization of that adequate food as a human right. So I'd like to stop there and hand over to Milagros.
So yeah, let's give another round of applause to Becca, Kate, Bettina, and Stineke. Thank you so much for a great panel. We do have to leave this space, but as we're talking about trust and communications, definitely go out, keep talking, have your cards ready, and make those connections, because I think this is a great group of people that had amazing questions. Also, thank you for the questions of the folks online. And for those interested in what happens next, this is a launch of a 3-year collaboration with Colorado State University, Cornell, with Foundation for Food and Ag funding, as well as Rockefeller Foundation, sorry. So there will be a website built for this project where you can stay up to date on what's going on. So everybody who registered to participate online or in person, you'll receive a link when that website is finalized to follow through in our journey as we try to really get into the data to make better policies driven by data and evidence. Thank you again for coming and have a great weekend.